Adam, are we good? All right. Wonderful. We're going to go ahead and get started. To those lingering outside who want to join us, please come in and find a seat. It is my honor to introduce my friend and a total libertarian badass named Scott Horton. If for some reason you don't know him, Scott Horton is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and podcasts The Scott Horton Show from scotthorton.org. Scott is the author of the 2024 book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, which, by the way, he's got like 3 boxes of them that he brought with him, some of them there, and I think he's going to be selling some of those books after his remarks, if you're so interested. And I will tell you, I'm personally proud that I got a single footnote in that book, so you can go searching for it. It's like a Where's Waldo kind of thing. And also, he is the author of the 2021 book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, the 2017 book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the editor of the 2019 book, The Great Ron Paul, The Scott Horton Show Interviews, 2004 to 2019, and the 2022 book, Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Sure, go ahead, you can applaud that if you want to. This guy's written a lot of books. On his podcast, The Scott Horton Show, he has conducted more than 6,000 interviews since 2003. His articles have appeared at antiwar.com, the American Conservative Magazine, the History News Network, the Future of Freedom, the National Interest, the Orange County Register, and the Christian Science Monitor. He was featured in the 2019 documentary In Endless War, Getting Out of Afghanistan, and contributed a chapter to the 2019 book, The Impact of War. Scott lives in Austin, Texas, with his wife, Larissa, though we certainly hope that maybe one day, maybe he'll think about joining us up here in the freest state in America. Well, I don't know. We'll keep working on him. And I also will note, I discovered earlier this week here at Porcfest that he's also a hilarious stand-up comic. Who would have thunk it? So please welcome to the stage and give a warm round of applause to the great Scott Horton.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. You're too kind. All right. To recycle a joke, I told you Donald Trump wasn't a Russian agent. He's an Israeli agent. We all knew that from the last time that he was president for 4 years, right? Remember? All right. Anyway, so I'll start with the war, the most current of the wars. I know there's a few. And then I'll try to fill in some background detail for you and explain what's going on. Obviously, last week, Israel launched an aggressive war against Iran, what they call a preemptive war, which is a hoax completely. It was an unnecessary war, even from Israel's point of view, if you take on their national interests as important, and will surely lead to all kinds of consequences for them and for us and for the region and God knows what from here on out. The people who promise that it's going to be easy this time and work this time are the same ones who promised that all these times before and led to the complete destruction of Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Mali, Syria, and on, all through North Africa and of course, ongoing in Central Asia. And so you could probably, if you're just placing bets, bet that this is not going to go well. Where we are right now is that, and look, don't take this out of context too badly, I don't think, too seriously, but there was a report that Trump is not considering the use of nuclear weapons in a first strike against this non-nuclear weapons state. to destroy their Fordo underground facility because the Department of Defense thinks that the 30,000-pound bunker buster deep earth penetrators ought to do the job. And then the White House denied that and said, no, in fact, all options are on the table. Now, the truth is, it's got to be the case. I don't know how deeply Fordo truly is buried or how tough that granite is or how effective our 30,000-pound bombs would be on that. They do have potentially nuclear bunker buster bombs as well. You'd think that they could just drop enough conventional bombs down the same hole until they got the same effect, or even, assuming the premise here of destroying the Fordo facility, why not just send in enough A-10s to secure the perimeter and drop in the airborne and have them go in there and destroy it by hand? Right? There's no need to use a nuclear weapon, even talk like that. This is the President of the United States, the most powerful, the world empire, most powerful nuclear weapon state, threatening to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state. He should be removed from office today for this. This is unbelievable. And then you listen to the hawks. I have to debate next Tuesday. I'm going to debate Mark Dubowitz from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And someone sent me a clip of him on TV and saying, well, America has to get involved now to destroy the Fordo facility. Because if we don't, now the Iranians will surely break out and make a nuclear weapon. Now that Israel and America haven't attacked them this way, with Mark Dubowitz and all of his associates' encouragement this whole time. The balls of these people, it's unbelievable. And they're also palling around, literally, I'm sorry, I wouldn't make this up and jerk y'all's chain. They're posting pictures, the Israelis are posting pictures on Twitter of their officials palling around with the son of the Shah Reza Pahlavi. And they're talking about parachuting in His Royal Majesty's Highness monarchy dictatorship. Is that what Trump meant when he went to Qatar and he gave that speech and said, we don't believe in neoconservatism and spreading democracy anymore? Is just because they're preparing to reinstall a monarchy? That's what the United States of America is doing. We don't just support monarchs. We reinstall their families in power when they've been overthrown in popular revolutions. We're still not over the fact that they overthrew our sock puppet dictator that we had no right to foist on them back in 53, back in 79. It's crazy. And it's totally unnecessary. And I'll tell you, I found out when I was writing my last book, what I didn't know when I was writing my previous book, which is actually about the Middle East, which is that in the early 1990s, there were many people at the height of America's foreign policy establishment who wanted to normalize relations with Iran. Some of y'all might remember Dick Cheney even committing the cardinal sin of going to Australia and criticizing his own government overseas when he was the CEO of Halliburton and saying God did not see fit to put all the oil under friendly democratic nations, but we can still do business with the Ayatollah. Hell, British Petroleum does business with them. And Halliburton is an oil services company. That means they build construction for oil companies, right? They do pipelines and infrastructure. And Dick Cheney himself said we can do business with the Ayatollah as late as 98. But as early as 93, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been Jimmy Carter's foreign policy advisor, national security advisor, and right-hand man, during the crisis of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and the hostage-taking, the failed Operation Eagle Claw rescue mission, all this egg was on Brzezinski's face. It was his humiliation. And yet by 1993, he said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to build an oil pipeline from the Caspian Basin down through Iran to the Persian Gulf. It'd be a great way for us to make money, for them to make money, and for us to begin to heal relations with them. Let bygones be bygones. You know who agreed with him? Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, who had been Kissinger's right-hand man. And I know what you're saying, Scott, these are Rockefeller men. Yeah, exactly. The Rockefeller men wanted to do business with Iran, to warm up relations with Iran 30 years ago. And y'all know what happened. The Israel lobby said no. And what happened was Yitzhak Rabin had changed Israel's strategy from what they called the strategy of the periphery, which meant that they wanted to be friends with the outerlying states like Turkey, Iran, and Ethiopia to keep the closer Arab enemy states' attention divided, so that Syria would also have to look north, Iraq would also have to look east, Egypt would also have to look south, right? Sorry, I should be doing y'all's point of view on my directions here. But Rabin wanted to change that policy. He wanted to make a pseudo-Palestinian state, not a real state, but he did want to make a deal with Arafat, and he wanted to then make a deal with the rest of the Sunni Arab countries, the closer ones. But in order to do so, he needed to demonize Iran. And as Trita Parsi writes in his book, Treacherous Alliance, the Clinton administration people thought this was hilarious, because after the Iranian Revolution, the Israelis had stayed friends with Iran all through the 1980s. That's why during Iran-Contra, when Ronald Reagan switched sides in the war for a short time and sold missiles to the Ayatollah, he used the Israelis as the cutout to sell them the missiles, because they still had that ongoing relationship. And this is like in the first year of Clinton, the Israelis are pro-Iran, and then they just turn on a dime. And the Clinton administration officials all have a good laugh with themselves about what's happened. Nothing's changed in Iran. The change is simply one of strategy in Tel Aviv and how they want to approach things now. And part of that meant that now that we're going to make Iran the enemy, they're going to certainly feel like we're their enemy now too. But now, because America, with some Israeli encouragement, beat up on Iraq so bad in Iraq War I, the first Gulf War, 1991, now Iraq isn't powerful enough to balance against Iran. So now America must stay in Saudi Arabia under the dual containment policy to contain Iraq and Iran from Saudi. And of course, the policy was inaugurated by a guy named Martin Indyk, who had worked for Yitzhak Shamir, the recent, formerly a terrorist leader, and then had been the prime minister, the Likud party prime minister of Israel, and then he went to work for Bill Clinton. And he's the founder of what's called the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINEP, which you'll see their experts cited all the time, which is literally a spin-off of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And their entire agenda is convincing American policymakers that our interests and Israel's interests are the same, when, of course, that couldn't be further from the truth. And so, as many of you know, the presence of those forces in Saudi Arabia, particularly to bomb and blockade Iraq that whole time, was the single leading major grievance of al-Qaeda, who were, in fact, America and Saudi and Britain's mercenary terrorists that we used against the Soviets in Afghanistan, against the Serbs in Bosnia and Kosovo, and against the Russians in Chechnya. And yet this is what turned them against the United States. Bill Clinton might have been providing them support here, here, and here, but he was still driving them crazy here, here, and here. And their war, as many of you may know, they had attacked us numerous times throughout the 1990s in the lead up to September 11th, and this was the #1 grievance on their list. Their second grievance on their list was American support for Israel and their brutality against their helpless captives in Palestine and the people of Lebanon. And in fact, importantly, after Yitzhak Rabin was murdered by a Benjamin Netanyahu fan in 1995, he was replaced by Shimon Peres for a short time. And Shimon Peres, in an act of toughness and furthering the Rabin doctrine of turning the periphery strategy around, reinvaded southern Lebanon to attack the Shiites there. And when he did that, get this, it was literally Naftali Bennett, the future and probably our future again Prime Minister of Israel, who was the officer who called in an artillery strike on a UN shelter and killed 106 women and children. And when Osama bin Laden issued his first declaration of war against the United States in 1996, get this, it's called Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places. Pretty subtle, right? Anyway, so right in there, in the very beginning of it, he goes on about the Qana massacre, says, we'll never forget the severed arms and legs and heads of the babies of Qana, and like that. Well, guess what? It was Mohammed Atta and his buddy Ramzi bin al-Shibh were these Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany. And when they read that, they decided to volunteer for this Saudi to get revenge on Americans for supporting Israel slaughtering Lebanese. See? And so that's why they told you they hate us for our freedom. That's why they told you the Taliban did it, because they hate that you're free and love your mama and Jesus and whatever. Because the reality was, it was Israel had driven these people to turn against the United States of America due to American support for it, with their total impunity in their war crimes against women and children, even way back then. And then what happened after September 11th? Then we kick off a whole era of war, mostly for Israel. They couldn't wait to pivot out of Afghanistan. Not that I'm saying they should have stayed there, or I wrote the book on getting out of there, but they couldn't wait to pivot to Iraq. And why? What was the big deal with Iraq? Well, it's absolutely true. W. Bush was the president. He was the one calling the shots and won. His father was humiliated by the fact that he lost after one term with Saddam still in the chair. And also, he probably believed the absolutely ridiculous hoax that Saddam Hussein tried to murder his father with a truck bomb in an assassination plot in 1993. Bill Clinton bought it, and that was one of the things that gave him the impetus to go ahead and adopt the dual containment policy. But that wasn't the Israelis that pulled that hoax off. That was the Kuwaitis. And get this. Everybody knows the babies in incubators hoax from Iraq War I, where the daughter of the ambassador testified to Congress that she was a nurse at the hospital in Kuwait City and that she saw Iraqi soldiers dump helpless infants, premature infants, out of their incubators, leave them, quote, on the cold floor to die, just to run off and steal their incubators, maybe even to just destroy them out of cruelty, right? Well, that was a complete and total hoax. Well, literally, it's 2 years later. Her father is the guy who makes up this story, that this whiskey smuggling ring was trying to set off a truck bomb and kill George Bush Sr. Total hoax, debunked by Seymour Hersh by the end of the year, but everybody still believes it anyway. I mean, people everywhere still believe this story, just because they heard it once and no one ever said it was a lie, and so fine. And I'm sure W. Bush bought that too. I think Dick Cheney wanted to make some money for his buddies at Halliburton. He had made some bad business decisions as CEO. I think he was trying to compensate for. Donald Rumsfeld had his doctrine of military transformation, where he wanted to stick it to big army and instead give their money to the Air Force and special operations teams so we can do light and fast regime changes and move on to the next one and this kind of thing. And then there's the neocons. Now, who's and what's a neocon? Everybody says that everybody who's a hawk is a neocon, but that's not what neocon means. It's a group of people. And it's a biographical description, and they're called neocons because they were new conservatives. They had been leftists, most of them Trotskyites. And a lot of people say, even recently, Mark Levin has said that this is a smear term for Jews and just is an anti-Semitic term. And that's not true. It is a largely Jewish movement because, after all, Trotskyism was never that popular in the United States, except for a few neighborhoods in Brooklyn and places like this, and, you know, wide and disparate colleges, but never had a lot of grassroots support. So that is the background of a lot of the guys who were involved in this movement. But there were Catholics and Presbyterians and others involved as well. Zalmay Khalilzad is their pet Muslim, so it's not exclusively a Jewish thing. But what it is it's a sect of guys who were leftists. And what was Trotsky's split with Stalin? He wanted world revolution, overthrow everything. Turn, as Michael Ledeen would write in the National Review, turn the region or the world even into a boiling cauldron of creative destruction. And they don't mean that the way free market capitalists mean it. They mean government destroying societies in order to replace them supposedly with something more to their liking. And this is the ideology of the neoconservatives, is completely against our basic Western conceptions of rights and principles and bottom-up self-government or anything like this. They're big students of Leo Strauss, many of them consider themselves philosopher kings, telling us noble lies because we're unfit to handle the real truth of why they need our kids to die for Israel and stuff like that. And so Bush Sr. had called them the crazies in the basement. Keep the crazies in the basement, he told Brent Scowcroft. They're allowed to kill people down in Latin America, but keep them away from Middle East policy. But W. Bush hired half of them. The other half wrote for the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the National Review, and the Weekly Standard. And these were the guys who lied us into war. And in the vice president's office, it was especially Scooter Libby, John Hanna, and Elliot Abrams and Eric Edelman. Oh, I'm sorry, Abrams was on the National Security Council with Robert Joseph and Zalmay Khalilzad and Robert Hadley under Condoleezza Rice. Then in the defense, Wormser moved around from defense to state to the vice president's office. His job at defense was firing all the Arabists who knew anything about the Middle East and had anything but Israel's interests in mind out of the Office of Net Assessment. Then he went to state, where his job was to keep a leash on Colin Powell and his right-hand man, Dick Armitage, and prevent them from obstructing the effort to get into the war. And it was widely agreed that these men were acting directly as Dick Cheney's agents. And as Colin Powell himself called them, he said it was a separate government that they set up inside the government, even out of the control of the president, under the control of the vice president. And then in the Defense Department, you had on the Defense Policy Board Ken Edelman. Newt Gingrich is not really a neoconservative, but he was very close with them. And then you also had Richard Pearl. Even though his position as chair of the Defense Policy Board might not seem like much, he was one of the real major ringleaders right there, with Paul Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and then his aide, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Douglas Feith. And then under him, they created the Office of Special Plans. Sounds really interesting, right? Sounds really boring. This is where they laundered all the lies to make you and your families afraid enough to let them go and launch their aggressive war against Iraq in 2002 and 2003. The CIA, they would torture lies out of people even to pretend Saddam was back in Al-Qaeda, whatever you got. But they wouldn't quite go far enough on the WMD lies. Those analysts wouldn't quite get it together. So they really needed the neoconservatives to dig through the CIA's trash and take whatever nonsense that they could get some exile to repeat and quote and funnel all that into the intelligence stream. And that was how they made the case for that war. And why'd they do it? They did it primarily because David Wormser and Richard Pearl were convinced that this would be good for Israel. And they'd written this plan in 1996 for Benjamin Netanyahu. Right after Shimon Peres was out, Netanyahu came in for the first time. And they wrote this policy paper for him called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And there's a companion piece called Coping with Crumbling States as well. I hope you guys got a pretty good picture of the Middle East in your head here. And so here's the neocons thinking. I know this sounds crazy. Maybe it's too complicated to really understand at first glance, but you can rewind this, you know. Here's what they thought. They thought they want to make a clean break with the Oslo peace process that Rabin had started that said we want to deal with the Palestinians and give them some kind of pseudo-state on the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And they said, well, we're Likud. We don't want that. Forget that. We want to steal all of Palestine one day. Screw those Palestinians. Problem is, though, is we got Hezbollah on our northern flank, and they're armed by Iran by way of Syria. And it's hard for us to wage our unlimited acts of violence against the Palestinians that we want to wage in order to steal all their property, as long as we got to deal with these guys hassling us, essentially threatening us with these missiles on our northern flank. So what we want to do is we want to neutralize Iran's ability to arm Hezbollah by way of Syria. Right? With me? With me? But then how do we do that? By focusing on getting rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Huh? Secular Sunni Saddam? Sitting on a minority Sunni dictatorship in Baghdad. He's the roadblock between Shiite Iran and Alawite, pseudo-Shiite controlled Syria. Why in the world would you do that? Well, it's because they're stupid. They're as stupid as they are evil. Stupid as they are premeditated murderers. And what they did was they believed the lies of a famous Iraqi exile named Ahmed Chalabi. And in A Clean Break, and in Coping with Crumbling States, and in the companion book that they later published, Tyranny's Ally, Chalabi's name is brought up over and over again. He's our good Iraqi exile friend who assures us that if we get rid of Saddam, we'll be able to install a Hashemite king, either the king of Jordan or his cousin, And then all the Shiites of supermajority Shiite Iraq will all bend down to kiss his ass, because as long as he has royal blood and claims to be the direct descendant of Muhammad, the Shiites will obey him like a god. No, wrong. That is completely wrong. And in fact, when Britain had installed a Hashemite Sunni king in Baghdad in the 1920s, the Shiites had a fatwa that forbid anyone from participating in their regime in any way and helped bring its total demise. Couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, the Shiite clergy leadership claimed to be descended from Muhammad, but that's not all they claim. They're the leaders of the Shiite religion. And the fact of their status as descendants of the prophet, they don't claim that makes them magic, even claim to have as direct a line to God as a Catholic priest does. They don't claim to be any higher than anybody's plain old minister as far as that goes. There's no magic like sense of total allegiance and obedience to their every whim kind of thing, the way that these guys had been sold. So in other words, even if the Ayatollahs said, yeah, cooperate with the Americans, some of them would have said no, all right? Like it couldn't ever work like that. And so, but this was their thinking that led for especially Wolfowitz and the whole gang of neoconservatives to tell George W. Bush, yes, sir, trust us, we have gamed this out. This is going to be great. This is exactly what you want to do. Everything's going to come up sevens for us on this thing. And that was a huge part of what convinced him to do the war. And the neoconservative movement in the major papers and on the major TV channels, especially, of course, Fox, but the rest of them too, playing catch up, also played a tremendous role in lying the American people into war. And the thing is, this isn't a conspiracy theory, and it's not anything anti-Semitic or anything like that. I led with the three major Gentiles who were in charge of the government who did that war, which is Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld. And they're like nominally Zionists and like Israel, and we're perfectly happy to go along with what Sharon wanted as long as they thought that it coincided with what they wanted to. But that's not all that did it. What did it was the propaganda campaign by the neocons for a year and a half to convince the American people to launch that war. And that was what it was for. But then what happened? We fought an 8-year civil war for the Shiite supermajority. They now rule Baghdad, and they told George Bush, there's the door, don't let it hit you in the ass on the way out. They didn't even say thank you for fighting a civil war on their behalf all those years. And America's bet that the people of the Shiite regime in Iraq would need our guns and money more than they need their co-religionists and historical neighbors in Shiite Persian Iran next door was a lost bet, and they did lose it. And they were only able to get a nominal force back in there now in Kurdistan after Iraq War III against the Islamic State. And where did the Islamic State come from? That was really George W. Bush's decision before Barack Obama ever came to town. That now that we screwed up so bad, and we just like they say in soccer, we scored this own goal, and we put our regional rivals, the Shiite Persians, in power in Baghdad, as the Sunni king of Saudi Arabia said, it used to be us and you and Saddam against Iran. But now you've given Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. They have very fancy platters in Saudi. We just do silver mostly here, you know. And so that was the case. And so Bush then said, oh, yes, Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. What are we going to do about this? And the answer was what they called the redirection. And I really urge you guys, if you're interested in this stuff at all, to read this wonderful article by Seymour Hersh from March 2007 called The Redirection. And his whole series that year is along these lines. How they realized that they screwed this up, and now they have to tilt back toward the Sunnis, meaning especially the Saudis, the Turks, and the Israelis in the same column. But they don't have an army. Tilting back towards the Sunnis means tilting back towards Al-Qaeda. It means tilting back toward the bin Ladenites, who had just been the vanguard of the Sunni insurgency that had just killed 4,000 out of the 4,500 of our guys that died fighting in Iraq War II. The other, and I'll go ahead and add this now because it needs to be in here somewhere, the other 500 that were killed fighting the Shiites, and you'll always hear this. You will hear this in the war propaganda this week if you listen. They'll say Iran killed 600 of our guys in Iraq. That's a lie. Shiite Iraqis killed 500 of our guys in Iraq. And it was an absolute ridiculous propaganda campaign, a total hoax, that all of these bombs, the EFP, explosively formed copper core penetrators, were coming from Iran. Is totally disproven. I totally disprove it in my book. It was a huge propaganda campaign, a conspiracy between Dick Cheney, David Petraeus, and Michael Gordon of the New York Times, now at the Wall Street Journal, to lie us into a justification for launching strikes against IRGC bases inside Iran back then, which George Bush and the rest of the Pentagon told them no. And Bush put his foot down, and they didn't do it. In fact, Admiral Fallon, the commander of CENTCOM, said, "We're doing this over my dead body." No, we're not. And that was it. So we had 100,000 troops in Iraq who were embedded with the Shiites, who could have all been slaughtered like Order 66, embedded with guys who would, on a dime, turn to be their enemies, which is we may see here soon, although at least our guys are mostly up in Kurdistan, although there's still some in Baghdad. But boy, I'm going to go over time on this. Somebody right after me? So that was the thinking, and that's how George W. Bush and Barack Obama ruined the Middle East. When Barack Obama came into power, he picked up that same redirection. And he's the one who backed with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, and Israel, Qatar, and UAE. They backed bin Ladenite terrorists, the al-Nusra Front, Jaish al-Islam, and all the rest until it turned into the ISIS caliphate. ISIS is what? It's just al-Qaeda in Iraq. From Iraq War II, Zarqawi and those guys, they renamed the group the Islamic State of Iraq. When they went to Syria, they added, and Syria, and the Levant in Arabic, whatever. It's Daesh is sort of how you pronounce the acronym in Arabic. They call it Daesh. But that's who it is. It's Zarqawi's guys. It's al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria. That's who Nusra is. Guess what? That's who rules Nusra. That's who rules Syria right now. It's Nusra's stand now. And they had... What happened was, by 2013, they had consolidated power over all of eastern Syria. And then a year later, in June of 2014, they rolled in, as you all remember, the famous pictures of the line of Toyota pickup trucks with their headlights on and all the jihadis rolling right into Mosul. And from there, they took Ramadi and Samarra and Tikrit and Fallujah and virtually all of Iraqi Sunnistan in the western part of Iraq. So all of eastern Syria and all of western Iraq became the ISIS caliphate. And this guy Baghdadi, who was just junior partner to Zarqawi, got up there on the balcony like he's half bin Laden, half Mussolini, and declares himself the Caliph Ibrahim, divine ruler of the caliphate. At which point, this policy we're just doing this to spite the Shiites for accepting our gifts in Iraq War II. We're mad at them for being the beneficiaries of our stupid policy. So we build a whole caliphate to spite them, but then that's too much. So now we got to blow it up again. And so they launched Iraq War III, where they literally were flying air cover for not just Iraqi Shiite forces, but literally for the Iranian Quds Force on the ground, fighting into Tikrit. And I have quotes from the American Air Force saying, well, they are good fighters, and yeah, it is kind of ironic. We're flying air cover for the Iranians down there. And I have the quotes from the Iranians going, well, we do appreciate the air cover from the Americans, fighting against the bin Ladenite state that Obama built to spite them for, again, receiving the blessings of George W. Bush in the previous era there. And so then ultimately, though, Russia did intervene in 2015, and with the help of Hezbollah and the Iranian Quds Force, at least advisors, they defeated the al-Qaeda terrorists and herded what was left of their forces into the Idlib province, where they essentially just stayed frozen in amber, ruling this little rural province on the Turkish border, all through the first Trump administration and through to the very end of Joe Biden, when evidently the Turks and the Israelis activated them. And they did their own little October 7th, and they broke out of the Idlib province, and they sacked Homs, Hama, Aleppo, and Damascus in 10 days. And isn't it funny how when Hamas breaks out and does an October 7th, it's the worst thing in the whole world? But when al-Qaeda does it, it's great. Because al-Qaeda is overthrowing an Alawite leader who's allied with Iran. And the Israelis hate the Shiites more. They don't care who knocked down your towers. They care about them. And then for some reason, that means that's what the American government cares about. To repeat, it was not Hezbollah that attacked us on September 11th. It was al-Qaeda. And our government is committing treason in order to support the bin Ladenites against their preferred enemies, not their enemies, right? Their regional rivals, whether it's the Serbs or the Russians or the Shiites, wherever they are. They'll use bin Ladenite terrorists like September 11th never happened, like all our guys that got suicide bombed in Iraq War II. Don't mean a thing. Now, I'm sure I'm short on time, so I better skip to some more interesting points here for you guys. Speaking of October 7th, Iran didn't do that. They go, oh, Iran's been at war with us since their proxy, Hamas did this. That's not true. Hamas did that, and the Wall Street Journal had a whole thing about how no one in American intelligence believes that Iran ordered it. That's just Israeli propaganda. And the reason they did it was because of what they spun as peace deals, these Abraham Accords, which is, what are the Abraham Accords? That's where Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, whose bed Benjamin Netanyahu used to sleep in when he came to visit New York City, came up with a plan that said the American people can't afford to bribe the Bahrainis, the UAE, Sudan, Morocco, and they were working on Saudi Arabia with enough of our tax money for them to finally forsake the Palestinians. These weren't peace deals. None of these countries were at war with Israel. What it was they had always promised never to truly normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians got either citizenship or a state, and the end of their status as occupied slaves, essentially, of the Israelis. And what Kushner figured out was, well, what's your price? I got a printing machine. And so the Bahrainis got F-16s, and the UAE got F-35s, and Sudan got debt forgiveness, and Morocco got American recognition of their illegal invasion and seizure of the northern half of the nation of Western Sahara. And for those bribes, these countries then went ahead and recognized Israel. And then what happened was Benjamin Netanyahu, on September the 22nd, 2023, went before the United Nations and he held up a map of the new Middle East. And this is an inside joke. He was mocking Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres says we have to deal with the Palestinians so that we can befriend all the Sunni Arab states. And Netanyahu says, oh yeah? And he holds up his map of the new Middle East. There's no occupied territories on there. It's all Israel, greater Israel. And he says, well, look, all these Sunni states are our allies now. The Netanyahu doctrine is we win, the Palestinians lose. They get nothing. They get no citizenship. They get no end to the occupation. They get no independent state of their own. And in the speech, he just essentially flips upside down and says the Palestinians were holding everyone else hostage in this thing. And the speech is essentially about how Palestinians, you lose, I win, I get everything. And then 2 weeks later, they broke out of their pen and launched the October 7th attack in order to heighten the contradictions, to reinvigorate the controversy of their occupied status, and to make it politically impossible for Saudi Arabia to continue with this betrayal of them, which they had always promised never to do. And so that was the purpose of it. And I'm not saying at all that any innocent civilian who died that day should have died. In fact, there should be an important lesson for national governments and armed groups of all descriptions everywhere. Now, how horrible it was that they killed innocent civilians there, and how horrible it was for their cause that they killed innocent civilians there, to the point where, and this may be true, because there's a lot of evidence where you would think this. We don't know what they were thinking. We do know what they knew. And we know the Israelis knew plenty to stop the attack from even happening. Many suspect they let it happen on purpose because they wanted the outrage that would be generated by dead civilian bodies. And Hamas, whether that's true or not, Hamas obliged Likud with a crisis they could exploit. It was the stupidest thing they could have done for their own people. And just think of the opposite. What if they'd driven right by the rave, honk, honk, and then gone on, and the kibbutzes, and had just gone straight to the military base and even died trying? It would have been horrible, but it wouldn't have been anything like what happened. And of course, the Israelis, went with the whole babies in incubators, babies on bayonets propaganda, and embellished their tales of victimhood of that day beyond any reason. I recommend, for anyone who doubts that, I highly recommend you watch. It's just proven beyond any shadow of a doubt in the documentary Atrocity, Inc. by Max Blumenthal. And it's Israeli media that debunked all this stuff. It's Israeli media that admitted no one's stomach was cut open and their baby removed. No baby was thrown in an oven. No babies had their heads cut off and their bodies hung from clotheslines. No families were tied up together and set on fire. No teenage girls were raped or any of this. I believe there may have been a couple of rapes, but there's no evidence whatsoever linking Hamas directly to those. And there was certainly nothing like the campaign of mass rape that the absolute liars at the New York Times put out in December of 2023. Right when heat was really getting on Israel for how hard they were going on the thing, the New York Times came to their rescue with this gigantic hoax by Jeffrey Gettleman, who specialized mostly in justifying slaughtering Somalis, I thought. I don't know why he thought this was his beat, but it's completely destroyed. His lies and the rest of their lies, this so-called aid group, Zaka, who embellished all these stories about dead victims, dead civilians, and so forth. And think about the cynicism of the Israeli government here, where they're telling these people whose mothers and sisters were killed that your mother or sister wasn't just killed, she was raped to death all afternoon by a savage pack of demons. They told their own people that to get them that riled up, to get us that riled up, to justify what they're doing, to justify in their mind, and for their needs, in that use of that term, what they're doing to the poor Palestinians, which is a genocide, which is an attempt to destroy their society. Genocide doesn't mean after everyone's all dead. It better be at least 5.8 million. Genocide means when and not just, it doesn't just mean mass killing either. It means when the attempt is to destroy someone's country, their nation, their society, which is exactly what Israel's doing, wiping Gazan civilization, the Palestinian civilization in Gaza, off the face of the earth, destroying entire cities at a time, burying people alive, targeting families, targeting hospitals, targeting every university and school, every government office that might have land records or family histories or anything that they can, deliberately targeting toddlers and pregnant women. It is straight up Nazi behavior by the Israeli state. And you can read their own media about it. They kill Palestinians for, quote, sport, when they're, quote, bored. They accuse Hamas of hiding behind human shields. Well, first of all, they put all their military facilities right in downtown Tel Aviv. So as far as Hamas firing from near civilians, okay, but they do that exact thing. But far worse, they officially have something called the Mosquito Protocol. This is what a senior Israeli military officer told Haaretz was a, quote, sub-army of Palestinian slaves, end quote, that they forced to go into buildings and tunnels and rubble to clear. Palestinian women and children and elderly, innocent people, not Hamas terrorist captives who would dare to resist their complete annihilation. But literally women and children and elderly forced to go through tunnels, forced to dig through rubble, just in case there's a booby trap that they get it instead of a soldier who's actually doing the invading. A sub-army of Palestinian slaves. That's human shields. A soldier holding someone in front of him, like an officer, with Princess Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. That's a human shield, and that is official Israeli policy. So, every accusation, a confession by them. And now, I have too many things on my list here, but let me just get real quick to not real quick, but if I have enough time to explain the nuclear program here so that you understand, okay? George W. Bush, in 2002, he declared Iran part of the axis of evil. You remember this? You'll love this, okay? Get this, guys. The Ayatollah and Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and Kim Jong-il are all working together against you. Even though the Ayatollah and Saddam Hussein hate each other more than any two men in the world. The Ayatollah probably wasn't too concerned with Osama bin Laden, but certainly had no relationship with him whatsoever. Saddam Hussein was terrified of Osama bin Laden and jihadists of his ilk. And Kim in North Korea Listen, guys, the only reason they put North Korea on that list is because if they said Syria, you would have said, this speech was written in Tel Aviv. So they said, oh, you know what we should do? We should put North Korea in there. Okay, but so here's the policy. Saddam Hussein said, my hands are up. Everybody says to this day, he was bluffing. He was pretending he had weapons. Oh, really? Is that what it said in his 12,000-page dossier that he turned over to the UN, which was the same one that he'd given up in 95? That had everything that there was to know. His son-in-law defected. Hussein Kamel defected in 95 and gave him everything. America knew that he didn't have any unconventional weapons. They were lying, man. They were torturing lies out of people to come up with that justification. And they were in a hurry, and they got it done. They kept you scared enough and got it done. In North Korea, after a year worth of bullying, I don't have time, but it was all John Bolton and George Bush's fault that they withdrew from the NPT, kicked the inspectors out of the country, and then they started making nuclear weapons, and that's why they have at least a few dozen now. Because George Bush pushed North Korea to nukes. And guess what? Guess who doesn't mess with North Korea? Yeah, anybody. Because now they got atom bombs. The Ayatollah took a different take. The Ayatollah said, listen, my books are open. Iran is a member in good standing of the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 and has been since the Shah's day. We have a safeguards agreement with the IAEA, and we have no nuclear facilities anyway. And so you have no casus belli here, pal. Hands up, don't shoot. So it did turn out, though, that they did have a secret program, a very rudimentary one, and they did go to the black market to get the parts for it. They tried to buy a light water reactor, which doesn't produce weapons-grade waste, from China, but Bill Clinton prevented that from happening. So they couldn't go to the open market to get any nuclear facilities. What happened? They had to go to the black market, so they bought nuclear centrifuges from the Pakistani nuclear scientist and black marketeer A.Q. Khan. And they dug a tunnel at Natanz, an underground warehouse at Natanz, and they started building a centrifuge facility there, which was outed by an American analyst named David Albright, and then the Israelis seconded that through their cutout, a communist terrorist cult from Iran called the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, who you may be hearing more from them in days come soon here. But all that was going on at Natanz there was they created the place. They had not introduced any nuclear material into anything, and so they were not in violation of any safeguards agreement. And what they've done is they created a civilian nuclear program. They have a domestic supply of uranium. Makes perfect sense. Capitalist economics types like you understand how they might have a comparative advantage in burning their local uranium for fuel and selling their oil for profit in the international market. Not as much demand for uranium as you might understand. So at the same time, I'm not asking anybody to be naive. I'm not here working for these guys, that's for sure. The truth of the matter is what they had created with their civilian nuclear program was a latent nuclear deterrent. This is the same as Germany, Japan, and Brazil right now. It means they've proven that they have mastered the fuel cycle. They know how to convert uranium from ore to yellow cake to uranium hexafluoride gas and then enrich that to be higher and higher percentages of uranium-235. The higher the percentage of uranium-235, the hotter it gets your water for your electricity program. They use 20% for targets for their medical isotope reactor for radiation treatment for cancer and for radioactive dyes and stuff. But to get up to weapons grade, it needs to be above 90%. So in other words, Iran's stance has been akin to, I have a revolver in one pocket, I got bullets in another. Let's you and me not fist fight here, pal, and escalate this thing. And America's position, forget the analogy, their position has been subtly implied, not very subtly implied. If you don't attack us, we won't make a nuke. And America's position has been, if you make a nuke, we'll attack you. So we had a perfect standoff. We had the perfect basis for an agreement. Okay? You guys don't move from latent to real program. And we won't move from threatening you to actually killing you, all right? That was the basis of the Obama deal of 2015. I'm no Obama fan. I just told you how he committed the highest treason in world history, creating a bin Ladenite caliphate in Iraq and Syria. The fact of the matter is, in 2012, the world, all the media, all the nations, everyone talked as though the NPT didn't exist, as though Iran didn't already have a safeguards agreement, as though Mohammed al-Baradei and the IAEA inspectors weren't already verifying the non-diversion of nuclear material in Iran to any military or other special purpose, which in fact they were doing. But that was just like invisible. And so Obama said, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to add another layer of deal on top of that. And the other layer of deal on top of that meant that they restricted their program severely. I'll describe in a minute. And I have 10 more? Great. They restricted their program severely, and they expanded inspections severely, including to places where there was no evidence, military bases even, where there's no evidence of any nuclear activity whatsoever, but where America may have had suspicions. And boy, do I not like giving Obama credit. How much credit do I want to give John Kerry? John Kerry worked this deal where, unlike a regular UN Security Council vote where any nation can veto it with a no, this was majority rules. Well, y'all know how that works. America, Britain, and France versus Russia and China, right? So if America and our closest allies agree, we get whatever we want. And if it doesn't matter if Russia and China disagree, and if the Iranians refuse to go along according to the process, then automatically the Russians and Chinese can't stop this either. Automatically the entire global sanctions regime kicks right back into place. That was the way that the deal was constructed. And what did America give them for that? Not welfare. That pallet of cash, that was Iranian money that Jimmy Carter stole from them in 1979. John Kerry just gave it back. He bribed them with their own money to completely restrict their program and expand inspections beyond anything anyone could have hoped for, and complete with another solemn vow by the Ayatollah that he had no interest whatsoever in pursuing nuclear weapons. Now, I'm not saying anyone should take the word of a politician for anyone. They keep trying to say this to me on these news channels and stuff. Oh, you trust the Ayatollah. It has nothing to do with that. The guy's not just a politician, he's a theocrat. Think of some alien religion to me. Think how impressed I am by that. Give me a break. But the point is, we know from the actual reality of how this has played out. When the old Ayatollah and the new Ayatollah, new since '89, have issued their fatwas against the creation of weapons of mass destruction in Iran, their governments had obeyed that. When Iraq was attacking Iran with chemical weapons with American help, not just mustard, but sarin and Tabun nerve gas, attacking their cities with American satellite targeting and financing for it all. They bought most of it from the Germans, but with American money. The IRGC said to the Ayatollah, we have the chemicals ready. If we mix them, we can make a weapon. And he said, absolutely not. It is haram. It's forbidden by God and me. No. So this is the ultimate ruling of the supreme leader of Iran, that we will not respond in kind to Iraq with chemical weapons then. Now, that doesn't mean that these are the most virtuous people or whatever. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that's the reality of the fatwa. The fatwa has clearly been the law. Now, as I'm saying, they can change that. The Ayatollah can change his mind about what God thinks any day, right? And as I said at the beginning, Mark Dubowitz says, well, geez, now that we've attacked them, we better go ahead and make sure and destroy every last bit of their program, because now they're much more likely to break out and make a nuclear weapon, which is what I've been trying to tell you for 20 years in a row. I swear, I'm so sorry. I was not able to get my point across effectively here. And then listen, and you guys know how this works. It doesn't matter whether you're the Americans or whether you're the Russians or whether you're the Israelis. You're in for a penny, you're in for a pound, you're in for a ton. All they can do is ruin everything and then make matters worse for their own position. Just like Putin in Ukraine. I wrote a book about how this is mostly America's fault, except for the part that's everybody else's fault too. But what Putin has done has been very bad for Russia too. He just took all the pro-Russian Ukrainians out of Ukraine. Well, now everybody left in Ukraine hates Russia, and from now on, and now they have a whole different series of problems to deal with there. It's the same kind of situation here. Now that we've attacked them, We got to kill what? Every last PhD in the country? Every last, aluminum smelter has to be exploded so that they can't make centrifuge tubes? We're going to, send in our guys to occupy their uranium mines and make sure that they can never, have uranium again? Or we're going to hunt down and murder every last Shiite cleric so that there's nobody left to take over the new regime or to dispute when we parachute in the son of the Shah. I can't get over that shit. That's so amazing. I just can't believe it. This is what they seem to think. And I'll tell you, man, I was on Piers Morgan the other day, and they stopped our panel and interviewed Nancy Mace. And Piers Morgan says, well, listen, if the regime falls, then what, Especially after the last 25 years of this. And she goes, well, the Iranian people will just have to rise up. And then, it'll work out, whatever. See, so I remember this from 2011. Does anyone remember the California congressman from Orange County, Bob Dornan? And Bob Dornan was on CNN, and they said, well, but if we're going to replace Assad and the Ba'athist regime there, we're going to replace him with who? And Bob Dornan said, well, we just have to hope that someone will come to the fore. Come to the fore? And then what do we get? We got the caliphate. And again, the ISIS was defeated, but then Donald Trump, that different war criminal, Joe Biden and Recep Erdogan and Benjamin Netanyahu just helped the Al-Qaeda take over Syria. Donald Trump, I swear this is true, you can find it. Donald Trump met with Mohammed al-Jalani, now calls himself al-Shara, or maybe that's his real name, is al-Shara, the former leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, who's now the president there. And Trump goes, oh, he's so tall and strong and tough and handsome. And he has a real tough past. A tough past, killing American soldiers in Mosul and Ramadi by his own confession in Iraq War II. But that's what Israel wants, see? And that's the difference between Israel's interests and America's interests. It was Al-Qaeda that knocked our towers down, not Hezbollah. It's the radical Sunni edge of those people from the countries America supports the most and who hate us the most for that, who are the enemies of the American people and remain a major danger. And I'll close with this. Anybody remember the New Orleans New Year's Day attack? It got all obscured because there was this weird thing that went down in Las Vegas where this soldier also did a suicide truck bombing at a Trump hotel, and he wrote some weird email to Sean Ryan about a bunch of junk, and huh? But it confused the whole issue, and everybody forgot all about what happened in New Orleans. But what happened in New Orleans was that an American soldier, a veteran, who converted to Islam, declared his loyalty to ISIS. And who knows if the guy's off his meds or strung out on meth or what his problem was entirely. But apparently he filmed himself in messages to his family all the way driving from Houston to New Orleans. And they haven't released that video or released that transcript. When he got there, he hit the gas, he ran straight down Bourbon Street, and I'm sorry, does anyone know how many people he killed? It was a couple of dozen people died and many more wounded. It was horrible. And it was extremely lucky that when he crashed into a bunch of construction equipment right in front of a group of cops. Like 6 cops were just standing right there. He goes, salam! He gets out of the truck with a gun in his hand, and they just blow him away. But otherwise, it could have been much worse. If he had a couple of guys with him, you seal off this exit, you seal off that one, you get on a rooftop, you ride in the back of the truck, you have a horror show beyond reason. Just a few months back, a 14-year-old boy went to his junior high school and killed 3 or 4 people before they were able to stop him. 14-year-old boy with an AR-15, probably bigger than him, was able to do that much damage in an instant. And they won't release the transcript, and they won't release the video. of that veteran's rants. But I'll bet anyone here, dollars to dimes, that he was ranting about American support for Israel's genocide in Gaza. And those people, imagine a bunch of people partying on New Year's Eve on Bourbon Street. Right? Not a single person there could possibly have ever had a thing to do with affecting or determining American policy in any way. Right? And they had to die for Israel's sins. And we're going to keep facing terrorism on our soil from bin Ladenites and hell, maybe now Hezbollah types after all, now that we're at war with Shiite Iran, as a consequence for American support for Israel. And what do we get out of that to benefit? Nothing. They're not our greatest ally. We're theirs. As Netanyahu himself said, it's absurd. Thank you. Thank you, guys. And listen, so I guess don't everybody run away, because I probably brought too many books and I got to sell them all. And I didn't talk about what's in there except the pipeline thing. So this is all about the background of America's new Cold War with Russia and the war in Ukraine, and I'm at least as good on that as I am on Iran. So everybody line up and I'll sign one for you and shake your hand and say hi, and thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it.